The hospital woke before the city did, and on that cold Boston morning, the long white halls felt heavier than usual as Dr. Emily Carter walked toward her shift. Coffee untouched in her hand, mind already racing through patient charts and responsibilities that never seemed to end. She had learned to move fast, think faster, and keep her emotions carefully folded away. Because, in a place like this, feelings could slow you down. Emily had seen every kind of patient, angry ones, frightened ones, hopeful ones, and those who had already given up, and, she believed, experience had hardened her enough to face anything. When she picked up a new file at the nurse's station, marked with the name Daniel Brooks, it looked ordinary at first. Age 38. Admitted for cardiac complications. Stable, but complicated. Nothing about it suggested it would change her day or her life. She walked into his room expecting another routine check, another brief conversation, another face that would blur into memory. But the moment she stepped inside, something felt different. Daniel sat by the window instead of lying in bed, watching snow fall over the city with quiet focus, as if the world outside still mattered deeply to him. He turned when he noticed her, offering a gentle smile that wasn't nervous or forced, just calm and honest. He greeted her politely, not like someone afraid of bad news, but like someone prepared to listen. As Emily began asking questions and reviewing his condition, she noticed how carefully he followed every word, how he didn't interrupt or rush, how he treated the moment with respect. There was no panic in his eyes, no denial, only a thoughtful seriousness mixed with warmth. She explained his test results, his treatment plan, the steps ahead. And instead of responding with fear, he thanked her for being clear and kind. His voice was steady, and there was something quietly strong about it, something that made Emily pause even as the minutes passed quickly. She felt unusually aware of time, of the sound of machines, of her own breathing, and she didn't like how human she suddenly felt. Daniel asked a few thoughtful questions, not dramatic, not desperate, just curious about his own future. And when Emily answered, she found herself speaking more gently than usual, choosing her words with care. She told herself it was professionalism, nothing more, yet her instincts told her this was not a normal interaction. When the visit ended, Daniel thanked her again, this time with a look that carried gratitude deeper than the situation required, as if he felt seen simply by being listened to. Emily nodded, professional to the end, and turned to leave. But as her hand reached the door, she hesitated, feeling an unfamiliar weight in her chest. Out in the hallway, surrounded by noise and movement, she stood still for a second longer. Then necessary, her thoughts unusually quiet. She had done nothing wrong, nothing out of line, yet something inside her had shifted. She couldn't explain it, and that unsettled her more than any diagnosis ever had. She moved on to her next patient, then the next, but Daniel's calm expression stayed with her, replaying in her mind without permission. By the time her shift ended, Emily realized the truth she hadn't expected to face that day after years of medicine, training, and emotional control. She had encountered someone who did not fit into the category of patient she knew so well. He wasn't dramatic or demanding, broken or angry. He was simply present, quietly facing uncertainty with dignity. And that presence had touched something she thought no longer existed in her. As she stepped out into the cold evening air, snow still falling softly around the hospital, Emily admitted something to herself she never had before. In all her years of practice, she had never met a patient like him. And she had no idea what that realization would cost her in the days to come. Days turned into weeks. And without planning it, Emily found herself returning to Daniel's room. More often than required, her steps quicker, her focus sharper. As if something unseen pulled her there through the busy hospital halls. Their conversations moved fast, never stuck in silence, never forced, flowing naturally between medical updates and small pieces of life shared in short moments stolen between tests and rounds. Daniel spoke about Seattle, about rain-soaked streets and long drives with music playing low. about a life that once felt steady before illness slowed it down. And he spoke without bitterness, which surprised Emily more than anything else. She listened closely, not because she had to, but because she wanted to. And sometimes she forgot to glance at the clock, something she never did with other patients. Emily talked too carefully at first, then more freely, sharing how medical school had taken her far from home. How nights on call blurred together, how relationships faded quietly when time ran out. And Daniel listened with the same attention. She gave him, never interrupting, never judging. There was comfort in that exchange, a quiet understanding that needed no explanation. And the hospital room slowly became a place where time felt softer, less sharp. Daniel's condition improved slowly, not without setbacks. But he faced each update with calm strength, asking thoughtful questions, thanking nurses by name. Remembering small details others overlooked, and Emily noticed how people responded to him differently, how kindness followed him without effort. One evening, during a late check when the halls were dim and the city lights glowed faintly outside the window, Daniel admitted that hospitals made time feel strange, like life was waiting somewhere else, and Emily felt the truth of his words settle deep inside her. She confessed that sometimes she felt the same, even while rushing through days meant to save lives, and that honesty surprised them both. There was no romance spoken aloud, no rules broken, but something emotional grew quickly, quietly, like a feeling neither of them had named yet, but both understood. Emily began to notice small changes in herself, how she smiled more easily, how exhaustion felt lighter after seeing him, how she replayed their conversations in her mind long after leaving the hospital. She reminded herself often that this was temporary, that Daniel was a patient, that boundaries mattered, and yet every time she stood by his bed explaining results or listening to his thoughts, those lines blurred just enough to make her uneasy. Daniel sensed the distance she held and respected it, never pushing, never asking for more than she could give, which somehow made it harder. He spoke once about loneliness, not dramatically, just honestly, about how illness had paused his life and how he feared returning to a quiet apartment with too much space and too many thoughts. And Emily felt a tight ache in her chest because she recognized that fear in herself. She wanted to say more than professional comfort aloud, wanted to reach beyond words, but she stayed careful, choosing kindness without promise. As days moved quickly, their bond deepened through shared silence as much as conversation, through looks that lingered a second too long, through moments where both felt something meaningful yet unspoken. Emily began to realize she was emotionally invested in a way that frightened her. Not because it was wrong, but because it was real, and she had spent years avoiding anything that could distract her from control. Daniel's presence challenged that control, reminding her she was more than a doctor, more than her title, and that realization followed her home each night. When she lay awake staring at the ceiling, she thought of his calm voice, his thoughtful eyes, the way he faced uncertainty with quiet courage, and she questioned when exactly he stopped being just another name on a chart. By the time Emily admitted the truth to herself that she cared deeply, perhaps too deeply, it was already too late to step back without pain. And as she walked into the hospital one morning feeling both determined and unsure, she sensed that whatever this connection was, it was moving faster than either of them expected, toward a place where choices would have to be made. The shift in Daniel's recovery came without warning, turning steady progress into long days of tests and careful discussions. And Emily felt the pressure of responsibility tighten around her as she reviewed results that were not as hopeful. As before, she kept her voice calm when she spoke to him, explaining delays and new plans. But inside, she carried the weight of knowing his journey would be longer and harder than either of them expected. Daniel listened quietly, his expression thoughtful, and though disappointment showed in his eyes, he did not complain or lose patience, which made Emily respect him even more. As days moved fast, Emily noticed how exhaustion touched him differently. Now, how moments of silence grew heavier, and how his smiles required more effort. One afternoon, after a difficult appointment, Daniel finally spoke what he had been holding inside, admitting that fear had found its way into his calm. Not fear of treatment, but fear of losing time, of returning to a life that felt paused while the world moved on without him. Emily felt those words hit close to her own heart, because she too had sacrificed time, connection, and comfort in the name of duty. And for a moment, she forgot her role entirely. She wanted to reassure him, not just as a doctor, but as a person who understood what it meant to feel left behind. Yet she knew she had to be careful. She chose her words slowly, offering steady support without promises, reminding him that recovery was not a straight line and that strength often showed itself quietly. Daniel accepted her reassurance, but there was something unsaid between them. A shared understanding that could not be spoken without crossing lines. The hospital began to feel like a place filled with unspoken tension, and Emily found herself walking away from his room with a tight chest, questioning every look and every pause. Late one evening, standing alone in the staff lounge, she stared at her reflection and recognized how deeply she had become emotionally involved, how caring for Daniel had become personal in a way she had always avoided. She reminded herself of rules, of ethics, of the importance of distance, yet her heart resisted logic, and that inner conflict followed her into every decision. Daniel sensed the change, the careful distance she placed between them, and though he never confronted her, his silence carried quiet understanding and disappointment. One day, as Emily checked his vitals, he thanked her again, not just for medical care, but for being present when he felt invisible, and that simple sentence broke something open inside her. She realized then that connection itself could be healing, but it could also be painful when limits existed. The faster the days moved, the closer Daniel came to discharge, and the more Emily feared the end of something that had no name. She stayed professional, focused, determined to protect both of them, yet each goodbye at the end of a shift felt heavier than the last. When Daniel asked what life was like outside the hospital, Emily answered honestly, describing routines filled with work and little rest, and Daniel smiled gently, saying she deserved more than endless responsibility. Those words stayed with her, echoing long after she left the building. As discharge plans formed, Emily faced the reality that whatever connection they shared would soon be tested by absence. And she struggled to accept that caring deeply did not always mean holding on. Walking through the hospital halls one evening, she understood that this experience had already changed her. That Daniel was no longer just someone she treated, but someone who had quietly challenged her idea of boundaries and purpose. As she prepared for the final phase of his care, Emily felt torn between duty and emotion, knowing the moment was coming when she would have to let go. Unsure whether distance would bring relief or regret, and that uncertainty followed her like a shadow she could not escape. The day Daniel was discharged arrived faster than Emily expected, and the hospital felt different as she walked toward his room, aware that this would be the last time their paths crossed in this place that had shaped so much between them. Daniel was dressed in regular clothes, looking healthier, stronger, yet thoughtful, as if he too felt the weight of an ending neither of them had named. Their conversation stayed simple, focused on instructions, follow-up plans, and careful reminders. But every word carried something deeper beneath it. When it was time to say goodbye, there were no dramatic speeches, no promises. Just a quiet pause where both stood still, understanding that this chapter was closing. Daniel thanked her again, his voice steady but sincere, and Emily wished him well with a smile that hid more than it showed. She watched him walk down the hallway and disappear through the hospital doors, feeling a mix of relief and loss settle inside her, knowing she had done the right thing, while also knowing something meaningful had ended. Life moved quickly after that, filled with long shifts, new patients, and growing responsibilities. Yet Daniel remained in her thoughts during quiet moments. not as regret, but as a reminder of something human she had almost forgotten. Months passed, seasons changed, and Emily completed her residency. Growing more confident, more balanced, learning to carry compassion without losing herself. One evening, nearly a year later, after a long day, she stopped at a small cafe near the river, drawn by habit rather than thought, and as she waited in line, she heard a familiar voice say her name. She turned and saw Daniel standing there, healthier than she had ever seen him, smiling with surprise and warmth that felt unchanged. Time seemed to pause as they laughed softly, both unsure how to bridge the gap that months had created, yet finding it easier than expected. They sat together, talking freely for the first time, sharing stories of recovery, growth, and quiet struggles faced apart from each other. Daniel spoke of rebuilding his life, of learning patience, of appreciating small moments, and Emily shared how his presence during a difficult time had changed how she approached both work and life. There were no barriers now, no hospital walls, no roles to protect, just two adults shaped by experience and honesty. As they walked along the river afterward, city lights reflecting on the water, Emily realized that what they had shared had not been a mistake, but a lesson in connection, timing, and respect. Daniel admitted that meeting her had given him strength during his hardest days. And Emily confessed that he had reminded her why she chose medicine in the first place. Their steps slowed as conversation deepened, and though neither rushed toward the future, there was comfort in knowing they were free to choose what came next. Emily felt calm rather than afraid, grounded rather than uncertain. Understanding that some people enter our lives not to stay forever in one form, but to change us in lasting ways. As they stopped near the riverbank, sharing a quiet moment filled with possibility, Emily reflected on that first day in the hospital and smiled to herself, finally understanding the truth behind the thought that had stayed with her all this time. She had never seen a patient like him before because he had never truly been just a patient, but someone who arrived at the right moment to remind her of connection, healing, and the quiet power of human presence.